When we speak of great explorers, one imagines the likes of Columbus, Magellan, and da Gama, who traveled across the vast seas to discover exotic locations. However, the age of exploration in the 15th to 17th centuries was long predated by the often overlooked explorers of antiquity, who traveled vast distances beyond the edges of the known world. Among these, perhaps none were more prolific than the Carthaginians, who ventured out past the pond of the Mediterranean to explore what lay beyond in the Atlantic. Today, let us share in their discoveries. This video was sponsored by Magellan TV. They're an awesome documentary streaming service run by filmmakers with the selection of over 2,000 videos to choose from amongst the categories of history, science, nature, space, and more. When it comes to history documentaries, Magellan TV has the richest and most varied content anywhere. Ancient, modern, current, war, biography, and even related genres like science and crime, which are historical in nature. If you like our content, I can highly recommend you check out the documentary series Ancient Greece, the Greatest Show on Earth, which covers the fascinating history of ancient Greece through the lens of its theater performances. Magellan TV is compatible with Roku, Amazon Fire TV, Apple TV, Google Play, and iOS, which means you can watch it anytime, anywhere on your television, laptop, or mobile device. Sign up today to get a 1-month free membership trial by visiting the link in the description below or going to try.magellantv.com/invicta. The past was a world filled with unknowns, not just for us learning about it today, but also for those experiencing it at the time. We must remember that for most of history, an individual's knowledge of the world was quite limited. Surely, they would have been familiar with their local community, and perhaps a few major nodes of civilization adjoining their own, but overall, their information bubble was small. Perhaps elders or traders spoke of what lay beyond, but one must imagine that these stories often blurred the lines of fact and fiction. Take for instance the famed tales of Herodotus, who claims to have traveled widely, conducting interviews and collecting reports for his book, The Histories. It is from him that we hear of giant ants the size of foxes in India, of hole-dwelling people who shrieked like bats in Libya, and of folk who neither ate living things nor had dreams in the Atlas Mountains. These sorts of distorted views of the world colored the perspective of our ancestors. Even the most well-informed knew precious little about the world at large. Now, I don't want to give you the false impression that people were entirely clueless of their surroundings. They weren't. Rather, my purpose with this preamble is to reset our modern frame of reference to the realities of just how pervasive the unknown was in the ancient world. Yet while the darkness might be frightening, it is also an invitation to those bearing torches. After all, a yearning to discover what lies beyond has long been a human trait, not just out of some vague romantic idea about the nature of humanity, but for the more practical realities that venturing into the unknown can yield great rewards. Things like new land, resources, and trade are the lifeblood of civilization, which can be unlocked by exploration to propel a people forward. This might be done on foot or on horseback, but by far the most common and efficient means of exploration was by water. This was especially true in the context of the ancient Mediterranean, which was essentially a giant pool around whose edges were gathered countless communities. Though these might lie months apart by land, they could lie just weeks apart by sea. Thus, the keys to the unknown were often unlocked by boats, or to be more precise, by galleys. These were long, narrow draft ships powered primarily by oar and backed up by sail. In the early days, it was the ancient Phoenicians of the Levant who pioneered the field through advanced construction methods and navigation. Their mastery of the waves allowed them to link the far-flung markets of the Mediterranean and grow rich from the profits. Over the centuries, Phoenicians would spread across the Mediterranean, founding a vast array of trading posts and colonies. Such was the extent of their reach that Herodotus even reports a rumor of them having rounded the entire continent of Africa on behalf of the Egyptians. Even today, there are theories that the Phoenicians made it all the way to the New World. While neither of these have real historical credence, it does speak to the prolific reputation of the ancient Phoenicians. It is from these first, great explorers that the Carthaginians would inherit their maritime skills. Let's now turn to discuss their activities. The Punic colony would have at first begun learning the ropes by conducting local affairs along the coast of Africa. However, within a few centuries, they had certainly risen to rival their eastern ancestors when it came to maritime exploits. When Phoenician power began to wane in the 7th century BC, it would be Carthage who carried on the torch of exploration, leading it boldly into parts unknown. This was achieved by forging a vast maritime empire capable of not only maintaining the old network of trade routes, but also expanding its tendrils into the far corners of the known world. Now, gold, silver, copper, lead, tin, salt, grain, hides, wine, oil, textiles, jewelry, ivory, and many more goods bustled across the sea lanes at an ever-increasing pace. This Carthaginian trade network was built and maintained by the deployment of seaborne fleets composed of merchant, military, and expeditionary vessels. Merchant fleets, for instance, served as the workhorses for the mass transportation of goods. Military fleets, meanwhile, offered protection against raiders and rivals. And lastly, expeditionary fleets set up new trade posts and colonies which ultimately constituted the backbone of the Carthaginian Sea Empire. It is this group which we shall focus on. So what would one of these expeditionary fleets look like? Well, they would have been composed of wooden galley ships powered by oars and sails. There were a variety of different types in common usage at the time, including the popular pentaconter and later the bireme and trireme models. Small fleets might consist of just a handful of ships with 100 or so men in total. Over time as Carthage grew, however, it would send out larger and larger expeditions, which are reported to have fielded dozens of ships with tens of thousands of men aboard. Doing so was no easy task, as building, outfitting, staffing, and supplying such expeditions could be incredibly expensive. For reference, in classical Athens, a warship cost around 57 pounds of silver just to maintain each month. Thus, these larger expeditionary fleets would have required the backing of wealthy private investors or politicians who could leverage the government's treasury. In return, these sponsors not only expected substantial financial returns, but also the prestige associated with launching such an expedition. For example, we have records of expeditionary treasures lining the temples of Carthage alongside inscriptions recounting the related adventures for all in the city to see. But how would the actual exploration process unfold? Well, as we stated, ships would leave their harbors and venture forth either under oar or sail power. We are told that on a good day, a captain could expect to travel somewhere around 100 kilometers. In theory, a ship could therefore cross the 1,600 kilometer wide Mediterranean in about 2 to 3 weeks. However, things weren't so simple. Ships had to make frequent stops to rest and resupply due to the limited space aboard. Galleys thus frequently pulled into port or onto a beach for the night to allow the crew to camp, gather supplies, cook, and sleep. One must imagine the great contrast between how this daily activity took place while in familiar, friendly territory, as opposed to unknown and potentially hostile lands. Another reason to hug the coast was to avoid the dangers of open waters. Rough seas and storms could easily sink a ship by either flooding or outright breaking it into pieces. Yet shallow waters too had their own risks. Hidden sandbars or rocks could just as easily wreck a ship, but at least in these cases, the crew had a better chance of survival. Fleets traveling at sea therefore had to be extremely careful with their movements. But how did captains navigate in an age before detailed sea charts, radar, and GPS? Well, generally ancient captains used landmarks by day or the stars and moon by night to judge their position. They would also keep notes on their daily bearing and distance traveled so as to estimate how far along they were in their journey. For reference, captains could refer to existing logs and rudimentary charts which had been produced by others who had come before them. Well-traveled routes would have plenty of readily available information, while the opposite was true for areas off the beaten path. In some cases, a captain might have to rely on the notes of a single navigator, perhaps translated several times and dating back decades or even centuries. Other times, they had nothing to go on. In these situations, the fleet would have to advance with utmost caution. Carthaginian captains used sounding weights to measure water depth and might even dredge up material from the seabed for analysis. Keeping careful notes would be critical for finding one's way back home and would be an incredibly valuable product of the expeditionary journey. A captain's notes included a wealth of information including sailing itineraries, lists of ports, warnings about dangerous regions, and all kinds of geographical and ethnological descriptions of what was encountered. Such a set of notes, known in Greek as a periplus, therefore functioned as the closest thing to an atlas in the ancient world. They would be distributed and translated widely across the Mediterranean, with copies being passed on for generations. But perhaps the most famous peripli of the ancient world were produced by Carthage's greatest explorers, Hanno and Himilco the Navigators. Let us now relive their journeys. Both explorers lived in the 6th century BC and appear to have been contemporaries. Almost certainly they were rich aristocrats who may have been able to partially or even fully fund the expeditions themselves. Together, they would strike out to explore the lands beyond the Mediterranean by traveling out into the Atlantic Ocean. Sailing past the Pillars of Hercules, the two explorers would then veer in opposite directions. Himilco's journey would take him north. Unfortunately, the full account of his adventures have been lost, and we are left with just quotes and references from later authors. As a result, we know very little about Himilco himself or the composition of his fleet. However, it does appear that their primary goal was to find the mysterious Cassiterides, the Tin Islands. Tin was an incredibly valuable resource in antiquity, which could be combined with copper to produce bronze. It might also be mixed with lead to create low melting point alloys, which could be used to join all kinds of other materials in the production of crafts such as jewelry, pottery, and tools. Tin was also quite rare, making it a highly prized trading commodity. Himilco appears to have sought the primary source of tin by retracing its distribution route. Surely, his profit margin would be substantially higher if he could buy tin for cheap from the original supplier rather than the 100th middleman down the line. And so he traveled west from the main Punic territories to Iberia, which was a major hub along the tin trade route. Here, he encountered the Tartessian tribes who were highly active in the market. Some tin was indeed produced in the area, but most of it was imported from their own trade routes running up north. Himilco thus spent weeks following these and other routes up along the shores of Western Europe. Along the way, he would have stopped to resupply, trade, and gather information. The further he went, the more strange things became for this North African explorer. Apparently, his account described dense seaweed which slowed the fleet to a crawl, doldrums that forced the men to row their way out of them, thick fog that made it impossible to navigate accurately, and vicious sea monsters that accosted them. This journey into the lands of myth must have been quite harrowing, and we are told that it lasted a whopping 4 months to complete. It is hard to tell from our sparse records just how far they went, but some historians have estimated that they may have made it so far as the tip of Brittany in France or Cornwall in England. Upon its return, however, Himilco would have been able to tell an incredible story of his daring adventures and of course cash in on its immense profits. Such was the lasting impact of his incredible periplus that it would still be written about 800 years later. However, the exact details of his route appear to have been a closely guarded secret among the Carthaginians who did not wish for others to be able to find the fabled land of tin. The other famous Carthaginian adventurer of this period was Himilco's contemporary, Hanno. Luckily, an abridged Greek translation of his account has actually survived from Antiquity, and we are thus in a better position to describe his expedition. This one is reported to have begun with a huge flotilla of 60 pentaconters carrying 30,000 people. It was stuffed to the brim with all kinds of supplies and many passengers, including not only the crew, but also a huge complement of colonists. I will actually quote our records directly so you get a first-person view of the expedition. After passing through the Pillars of Hercules, we went on and sailed for 2 days' journey beyond, where we founded the first city, which we called Thymiaterium. It lay in the midst of a great plain. Sailing thence towards the west, we came to Salois, a promontory of Libya, bristling with trees. Having set up an altar here to Neptune, we proceeded again, going toward the east for half the day, until we reached a marsh lying no great way from the sea, thickly grown with tall reeds. Here also were elephants and other wild beasts feeding in great numbers. Going beyond the marshes a day's journey, we settled cities by the sea, which we called Caracas Maris, Gida, Acra, Melita, and Arambis. Sailing thence, we came to the Lixus, a great river flowing from Libya. By it, a wandering people, the Lixitas, were pasturing their flocks, with whom we remained some time, becoming friends. Above these folk lived unfriendly Ethiopians dwelling in a land full of wild beasts and shut off by great mountains, from which they say the Lixus flows, and on the mountains live men of various shapes, cave dwellers, who, so the Lixitas say, are fleeter on foot than horses. Taking interpreters from them, we sailed 12 days toward the south along a desert, turning thence towards the east 1 day's sail. There, within the recess of a bay, we found a small island having a circuit of 15 stadia, which we settled, and called it Cerne. From our journey, we judge it to be situated opposite Carthage, for the journey from Carthage to the Pillars and thence to Cerne was the same. Thence, sailing by a great river whose name was Crates, we came to a lake, which had 3 islands, larger than Cerne. Running a day's sail beyond these, we came to the end of the lake, above which rose great mountains, peopled by savage men wearing skins of wild beasts, who threw stones at us and prevented us from landing our ships. Sailing thence, we came to another river, very great and broad, which was full of crocodiles and hippopotami, and then we turned about and went back to Cerne. Thence we sailed toward the south 12 days, following the shore, which was peopled by Ethiopians who fled from us and would not wait. And their speech, the Lixitas translators who were with us could not understand. But on the last day, we came to great wooded mountains. The wood of the trees was fragrant and of various kinds. Sailing around these mountains for 2 days, we came to an immense opening of the sea, from either side of which there was level ground inland, from which at night we saw fire leaping up on every side at intervals, now greater, now less. Having taken in water there, we sailed along the shore for 5 days until we came to a great bay, which our interpreters said was the Horn of the West. In it there was a large island, and within the island a lake of the sea, in which there was another island. Landing there during the day, we saw nothing but forests, but by night many burning fires, and we heard the sound of pipes and cymbals, and the noise of drums and a great uproar. Then fear possessed us, and the soothsayers commanded us to leave the island. And then, quickly sailing forth, we passed a burning country full of fragrance, from which great torrents of fire flowed down to the sea, but the land could not be come at for the heat. And we sailed along with all speed, being stricken by fear. After a journey of 4 days, we saw the land at night covered with flames. And in the midst there was one lofty fire, greater than the rest, which seemed to touch the stars. By day, this was seen to be a very high mountain, called the Chariot of the Gods. Thence, sailing along by the fiery torrents for 3 days, we came to a bay, called the Horn of the South. In the recess of this bay there was an island, like the former one, having a lake, in which there was another island, full of savage men. There were women too, in even greater numbers. They had hairy bodies, and the interpreters called them the Gorilli. When we pursued them, we were unable to take any of the men, for they all escaped by climbing the steep places and defending themselves with stones. But we took 3 of the women, who bit and scratched their leaders and would not follow us. So we killed them and flayed them, and brought their skins to Carthage, for we did not voyage further, provisions failing us. Thus ends the tale. It's an incredible account to just read about, and one's imagination runs wild at just thinking what it would have been like to experience in person. Many academics have tried to match Hanno's description to physical locations, and thus create a map of his expedition. As one might imagine, this is quite a tricky task, and there are a wide variety of hypothesized routes. One of these proposes that the fleet made it all the way to Cameroon, near the equator. If true, this would have meant a round-trip journey of some 16,000 kilometers, or 40% of the Earth's circumference. The sheer scope of these expeditions is mind-blowing to me, and speaks to the incredible feats of the Carthaginian civilization that all too often go overlooked. I hope you've enjoyed this episode on just one aspect of their amazing civilization. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content, and stay tuned for new episodes on the history of the Carthaginians. A big thanks is owed again to all our subscribers, and the researchers, writers, and artists who made this video possible. Thanks for watching.